This is done by a YouTuber called Projects with Everyday Dave. I am fascinated by this stuff, Brian. This is right up my alley. This is, if I had the resources, I'd be out there doing this. He looks like he lives on a farm or an acreage, and he's got a fairly substantial rack of solar panels facing south that you see on farms around here a lot, about the same size. I don't know how many panels there are, maybe 30, I don't know, something like that. But behind those, and it's just beyond the shadow of those, is two vertical, is it two vertical or four vertical? He's got a small rack that he had to custom make to make vertical east-west facing panels. Now they're bifacial, which means on the back side they can get up to 50% of the power. So the front side is facing west, and the front side is facing east, just to balance it out. Now, he's got lots of data on his farm there from his panels. He lives in Ohio. Some of those panels that you see in that rack there are bifacial, and some of them aren't, so he has comparison between non-bifacial. But if you see in that shadow there, Brian, behind them, that's actually where you want to get the sunlight reflected back, because there's a skiff of snow on the ground there. It's winter when that picture was taken. You can see it on our YouTube channel. It's at 30 degrees because he's south of us. We would probably be, I forget what we are here. I think it's 40-some degrees, with the right angle. Where you angle them at such a way that you get the most production per year. And for them, it's 30 degrees. For us, it's angled higher. Okay, so some of them are normal and some of them are bifacial. And he did a test on his data from summer, winter, cloudy, sunny, and snow cover on the main 30-degree panel rack and these panels. For the most part, and he judges them panel by panel, or, couple panels by panel, based against each other, not the whole thing, because it's different output. So for the most part, he found that the vertical bifacial panels, which face west and east, didn't have much of a benefit and produced less electricity overall compared to the normal mounted panels. And one of the reasons he does stuff like this is for farmers, because farmers might want to do this and then have a combine or some sort of equipment for harvesting that goes in between rows of these things. So wide rows, and these would be like a shelter fence between different rows.
Big potential for vertical solar panels.
So the back of the bifacial panels at peak produce half of what the front panels do, even though they're facing the sun in the same way the AM is in the front of the PM. The shadow from the 30-degree rack was right where it'd be beneficial to pick up that reflected sunlight, but it does pick up quite a bit from the snow. The vertical panels facing east and west had no shadow. Okay, they had a shadow in the early morning and in the evening, but for the most part in the day, even at noon, there's no shadow because they're hitting right at the sides of them.
Yeah, so the collectors on the back of the panel should theoretically pick up more reflected light because there's no direct shadow right underneath them.
And that is what was happening. They were picking up a lot of reflective light, especially on cloudy and snow-covered days. So the same was true for the vertical panels facing east-west had no shadow. So, the middle of the day is usually a dip on these. It's kind of like a big M. It's big on the morning and evenings and a dip in the day. But for some circumstances, that was a little different. When the panels were covered with snow, so when it snowed, those 30-degree panels were covered in snow. So a little bit of light gets through, but not much.
Yeah, but the vertical ones never get covered in snow.
That's one of the advantages, and that's why I'm kind of fascinated by this, because we live, obviously, in a place that gets snow. Not a lot anymore, it seems, but sometimes we do get snow, obviously, because it gets very cold here. So when the panels were covered with snow, the vertical did way better, obviously, because there was no snow cover and lots of ground reflection. So it got me to thinking about, the situation of the future where we're overbuilding solar. And I've always said on the show, wouldn't it be cool, and this is just me spitballing here, to have different orientations, like to have an orientation of solar farms that are just for December when it's almost directly upright, where we are facing the sun. It's pretty close, just to get the maximum potential. But then you're wasting it for the summer. You could be getting a lot more in the summer, but you don't need it because you've got other panels that are, picking it up.
Well, we're hoping to build a new cottage out at our lake, and that's definitely one thing I'm thinking about. You tend to not get much solar in the winter, so I was thinking that same thing. Well, maybe we have a few vertical panels so that our winter production stays decent.
Okay, that's an interesting idea. Like, especially if it was on the side of a building, because he had to rig his own rack. He said he's going to post things when people come out with racks on his website. But yeah, I just got to thinking, and when everything's cheaper and we already have a lot of solar around, wouldn't it be interesting to do this? So why not mix the orientation? And right now, solar facing south is like a bell curve. It goes up and then down from the middle of the day. And yeah, but vertical is a little more in the AM and PM with a dip in the middle of the day. But he came up with a mixture of orientations and showed them on a curve here. And it's like an M, but the middle of the M doesn't sink very far. It's just a little bit down. So it's almost flatline throughout much of the day, which is ideal. And the blue line there is mixed orientation. And the green line is just east-west. But if you mix them up, if you had a little bit of them. Anyway, I'm going to let him explain it here in this clip.
If you installed 10 vertical panels facing east, 10 vertical panels facing west, and 10 panels at 30 degrees facing south, you could pull the dip up out of the middle and get almost an ideal result that would likely eliminate any clipping from the inverter. So even though the output on the bar graph shows this scenario only achieving 75% of the max, if I was using a typical undersized inverter, the top of the south-facing curve would be clipped off, and the result would be actually a lot closer.
Very interesting video. I'll put a link in the description, or not the description, the show notes. So it's closer to flat throughout the day, proving my long-held theory that mixing up panels might be a good idea. And this is something that hasn't been studied a lot.
Yeah, and he's talking about clipping. So sometimes you might have an inverter that has a sort of a maximum output. So you get all this energy, and then the inverter has to convert that energy from DC to AC. But yeah, sometimes at the peak of the day, depending on what your system is like, it'll actually, the curve will actually flatten off at the top because your inverter has a maximum of, say, 7,000 watts or 8,000 watts or something. So yeah, this kind of system would get more production because you're never clipping that top of the curve off.
I remember when I had my solar panels installed, I kept saying to them, I wouldn't mind putting in some more on, but I have nowhere to put them. And I was thinking about the side of the house, and I thought, well, that's kind of dumb because you're only getting, energy in the winter. But they modeled it and were actually quite surprised.
Oh, yeah.
They said they were very surprised at how good it is because it's not snow covered ever. And you still get some, it still works in the summer. It's just not ideal. Yeah. And in the winter, it brings in maximum.
Yeah, and you've got a big, tall, two-story house facing south. So, yeah, you could get probably very decent production from, panels just on the side of your house.
So I want to do, I want to cover this more and learn more as we get stuff coming into the show. And if you have any thoughts on this, or if you've experimented with this, or maybe even Brian will do it, maybe you'll do it, put some vertical panels up at the cottage, and that would be very interesting.
Yeah, so that was Projects with Everyday Dave on YouTube.
The Clean Energy Show.